Welcome to Morbid Outdoors, the podcast that ventures deep into the shadows of the wild. Here, we unravel the mysteries of missing persons, explore spine-chilling legends, and share the most morbid stories that nature has to offer. From the depths of the dense forests to the highest mountain peaks, we'll uncover the secrets that lie hidden in the great outdoors. Join us as we navigate the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying. So if you dare, grab your gear and let's embark on a journey into the unknown. This is Morbid Outdoors. Hello, everyone. My name is Elise, and I'm your host. And I have a quick question or favor to ask you. If you listen on YouTube and you have not rated our show on Apple Podcast or Spotify, I would be so appreciative if you could do that. Rating the show is free, it's easy, it's quick. You don't even have to write a review. If you don't want to, you can just give me 5 stars. I would greatly appreciate that so much. So yeah, I always have the little bit at the end for like, please leave me a review. But I think sometimes I just wanted to ask again because I think, that would help me out a lot. I don't believe that YouTube has the ability to rate podcasts. And I would really love if all my YouTube listeners could go and rate me 5 stars on Apple or Spotify. That would be amazing. In terms of personal things, I just went on my last hike of 2024. It was beautiful. I did 4 miles with a friend. It kind of rained on us a little bit, but overcast, great winter weather for hiking. And I capped out my 2024, looked at my stats, had some good hiking stats this year, even though I did not get to hike as much as I had planned or wanted to. But that just means that I have to step it up in 2025. And I would love to hear any of your New Year's resolutions that are unique or creative, or any of your outdoors resolutions. I would also love to hear that. My husband and I have a few trips planned next year, and I'm super excited to hike in some states that I've never been to before. I'm excited. I'm going back to Arkansas next summer, and it's a lovely state. I don't hike a lot there in the summer because it's so humid, but I'm excited to do a little bit more exploring into parts of the United States that I have never been. I would love to hear any travel plans you all have planned for 2025. I had an interesting Christmas. I was celebrating Christmas with my husband and his family at their cabin outside of Park City, Utah. And I got a phone call that my sister had fallen down like a flight of stairs and was in the hospital in San Francisco. And I'm the closest person to her, geographically speaking. And so I had like 3 hours notice, and I was boarding a plane on Christmas Day to fly out to San Francisco to make sure my sister didn't need me and make sure she was okay, if anything went bad. Luckily, she's not that bad off. She has a concussion and some bruising and contusions, but there's no brain damage or spinal injury. So that was a very unexpected Christmas thing that happened to me. And I just got home yesterday. So very interesting Christmas, but just glad that, that's what family does. You can drop everything and take care of family, and that's what they do. So I'm glad she's okay. It kind of threw some of my, plans off, but nothing that wasn't too bad. And I'm glad that I had the ability to just hop on a plane with 3 hours notice and then stay in San Francisco for a few days to help her out and then fly back to Utah. So happy to be back in Utah, happy to be almost into the new year. And it is actually feels so weird that we are almost in a new year. It went by so fast. I'm hoping you all had a good Christmas, and I hope you guys all have a very happy new year. Celebrate, just be safe, and yeah, let's ring in the new year. any way that you want. I will be hiking on New Year's Day for the first hike of 2025. All right, this is our second installment of Haunted Parks, and today we are going to be going to a park that I've actually been to and felt extremely creeped out by. So, without further ado, let's head into the morbid outdoors. Mammoth Cave is the largest known cave system in the world. Artifacts found inside the cave suggest people have been exploring Mammoth Cave for thousands of years, and yet scientists are still discovering new passageways and underground rooms. It has served many purposes over the years, including a saltpeter mine, tuberculosis clinic, and private theme park. Visitors often report seeing apparitions and hearing things. There's nothing spookier than being in a huge cave system with lingering souls. The first time I visited Mammoth Cave National Park was in 2021. My husband and I went to see one of his friends who lives in Kentucky, and we actually did a tour. It was super cool and very interesting. And you can actually, like, when you're down there, if you go in the wild entrance or the main entrance, you walk past these like monuments in the cave, and they look brand new, but they were actually erected in, like, the 20s or something like that. It's crazy. Like, because there's no weathering of them, they look brand new. It was really eerie to see. It's like something frozen in time in this cave. Apparently, someone on my husband's side of the family, like, people way, way, way back, they actually discovered it, apparently. That's what one of his cousins told me, and they are very into genealogy. And so I believe them when they tell me that because they do a lot of genealogy, and they were like, "Oh yeah, someone from, this side, they actually found the cave." So, very cool. Or that's what I'm told. So, that's my little personal tie to Mammoth Cave. I visited. It's beautiful. It is really eerie. I'm not a cave person. I did a short tour. I did not do any of the crazy ones where you're like crawling on your stomach because I would probably freak out and have to be rescued. Okay, let's start with some negative reviews. So, the Mammoth Cave National Park has a ton of negative reviews, and most of them revolve around the reservation system. But this is what one visitor had to say. Quote, "The historic tour is not so informative. It's a dry cave, just an abandoned mining cave. Won't recommend this tour. Each cave tour has a fee associated, so the national park annual pass won't work there." End quote. And to that I say, if you do your research before you visit, you won't have this issue. Another negative review says, "Overrated and boring. Stay above ground. It's actually worth seeing." And our last negative review for today says, quote, "Only because we didn't know we had to purchase tickets online when we arrived, we were turned away not knowing of anything else to do in the park, so we left. Donated $1 to the state donations. That was cool. Thanks again from Detroit." End quote. And to that, again, I say plan and prepare. Everybody has use of the internet, and you can go on the national park's website and read about how to plan for your trip. I'm currently having to do that for my Yosemite trip next year. So, yeah, you can plan, you can prepare, you have the internet. Do some Googling. It's not that hard. Now, the national park itself is just over 52,000 acres, and the cave system has formerly been known as the Mammoth Flint Ridge Cave System since 1972, when a connection was discovered between Mammoth Cave and an even longer system under Flint Ridge to the north. Like I said in the intro, this is the largest cave system in the entire world, and it's in Kentucky. Who would have thought? As of 2022, more than 426 miles of passageways have been surveyed, which is over 1.5 times longer than the second longest cave system, which is Mexico's Sac Atun, which is an underwater cave. So this is Mammoth Cave is huge. Like no other cave past like caves come close. This is the largest. And new discoveries and connections add several miles to this figure each year. So they are constantly discovering new passageways and rooms in Mammoth Cave. Mammoth Cave National Park was established as a national park on July 1st, 1941. And this is the park's mission. The purpose of Mammoth Cave National Park is to preserve, protect, interpret, and study the internationally recognized biological and geologic features and processes associated with the longest known cave system in the world. The park's diverse forested karst landscape and the Green and Nolan rivers, and extensive evidence of human history, and to provide and promote public enjoyment, recreation, and understanding. Wow, that was a mouthful, but that is their mission statement, and that's actually located in the National Parks Foundation document. Something that was like a recent thing is that at one valley bottom in the southern region of the park, a massive sinkhole has developed. And it's known as Cedar Sink, and it features a small river entering one side and disappearing underground at the other side. So, really, who knows what will be discovered if it opens further? And it most likely will. The National Park Service offers several cave tours to visitors. Some notable features of the cave, such as the Grand Avenue, Frozen Niagara, and Fat Man's Misery, can be seen on lighted tours ranging from 1 to 6 hours in length. There are two tours that are only lit by visitor carried paraffin lamps, like those old school lamps that you think of like miners having. And those are popular alternatives to the electric lit routes. Several wild tours venture away from the developed parts of the cave into muddy crawls and dusty tunnels. And those are the ones that I don't think I could ever do. I just did, I think it's called the Discovery Tour, something like that. But it was really cool. It was packed. We went in the dead of summer, and it was probably like 40 degrees cooler in the cave than it was up top. And it was really refreshing. But I think it's really cool that Mammoth Cave offers the lamp tours. So there's no electricity, no flashlights. You're exploring the cave just like the early settlers would have. There used to be a tour that was offered in the 1990s and before, and it was called the Echo River Tour, and it was actually Mammoth Cave's like most famous attractions because it took visitors on a boat ride along an underground river. Like you could go get in a boat with other people, like a pretty large boat, and take a tour of the cave by boat. This tour was discontinued for logistic and environmental reasons in the early 1990s. So, if you're a listener and you've taken that tour, I would love to hear from you how it was. I would love to take that tour. They no longer do it, but what a cool, unique, fun way to experience Mammoth Cave National Park. As for human activity in Mammoth Cave traces back 5,000 years. There have been several sets of Native American remains that have been recovered from Mammoth Cave and other nearby caves in the region, both in the 19th and 20th centuries. Most of the remains that were found were mummies, which which people think represents examples of intentional burial with ample evidence of pre Columbian funerary practices. So archaeologists, anthropologists are saying that these were intentional, and that goes a long, long time back, which is really interesting and cool. When human remains and artifacts are found and have been found, they are then protected with federal and state laws. So you cannot move a prehistoric artifact because it would contaminate it from a research perspective. And explorers of the cave are properly trained not to disturb archaeological evidence, and some of the cave actually remains out of bounds for even the most seasoned explorers, unless they're doing like an archaeology trip, which that's just crazy to me. And I think, I don't know if it was this year or last year, but someone dropped like a Cheeto or a bag of Cheetos in Mammoth Cave, and it made like national headlines because that can ruin a biome and that ecology in the cave system. And so I can't remember what they were forced to do, but basically it was a huge, huge deal that someone dropped Cheetos in this cave. Besides the remains that have been discovered in the portion of the cave that's accessible through the historic entrance, the remains of cane torches used by indigenous peoples, as well as other artifacts such as drawings, gourd fragments, and woven grass moccasin slippers, have been found in the Salts Cave section of the system in Flint Ridge, which is I love history. I love learning about indigenous history. This is so cool, and I can't help but feel like they might even be finding more in these new passageways. So the first record of Mammoth Cave was actually recorded in the late 1700s. Legend has it that the first European to visit Mammoth Cave was either John Hutchin or his brother Francis in 1797. The story goes that while they were hunting, one of them pursued a wounded bear to the cave's large entrance opening near the Green River. Caves in the area were already known before the discovery of the entrance to Mammoth. Even Francis had a cave entrance on his land, very near the bend in the Green River known as the Turnhole, which is actually less than a mile from the main entrance of Mammoth Cave. So that's the story is like they were pursuing a wounded bear and found this giant, giant hole in the ground. And who knows what happened to the bear, but that is how the story goes. That land that contains that historic entrance was first surveyed and registered in 1798 under the name of Valentine Simmons. Simmons began exploiting Mammoth Cave for its saltpeter reserves. And so I had to look up what saltpeter is. Saltpeter is actually potassium nitrate, and it's a chemical compound with a sharp, salty, and bitter taste. And the chemical formula is KNO3. It's basically potassium salt of nitric acid. And that stuff is used in gunpowder and fireworks and explosives. And this at the time was kind of a huge deal. And that's because of the time that it was found. The War of 1812 happened shortly after this saltpeter was found, and that became significant because the Jefferson Embargo Act of 1807 prohibited foreign trade. So, this blockade actually starved the American military of saltpeter, which makes gunpowder. And as a result, the domestic price of the saltpeter rose, and the production based on nitrates extracted from caves such as Mammoth Cave became more lucrative. So, Mammoth Cave was a huge moneymaker in this time. They were able to extract this saltpeter to make gunpowder in order to ship it off for the War of 1812. And in July of 1812, the cave was purchased from Simon and other owners by Charles Wilkins and an investor from Philadelphia named Hyman Gratz. Soon after, the cave started to be mined for calcium nitrate on an industrial scale, utilizing a labor force of 70 slaves to build and operate the soil leaching apparatus, as well as to haul raw soil from deep in the cave to the central processing site. Again, I want to remind you it was 1812. I don't think any of us listening agree with slavery, but this is what was happening at the time, and I felt that it needed to be included in this episode. As we all know, the war ended, and those prices for that saltpeter started to fall. So that was pretty much abandoned. Mammoth Cave then became a minor tourist attraction, centering on an indigenous mummy discovered nearby. In the spring of 1838, the cave was sold by the Gratz brothers to Franklin Gorin, who intended to operate Mammoth Cave purely as a tourist attraction. because, of course, like I said, the bottom had fallen out of the saltpeter market. Gorin was a slave owner and used his slaves as tour guides. And this actually is very interesting because a man named Stephen Bishop was one of these slaves and would make a number of important contributions to human knowledge of the cave. And he actually became one of Mammoth Cave's most celebrated historical figures. He was one of the first people to make extensive maps of the cave and named many of the cave's features. Stephen Bishop worked in the cave for a very long time, and Gorin wrote after Stephen's death, quote, I placed a guide in the cave, the celebrated and great Stephen, and he aided in making the discoveries. He was the first person who ever crossed the bottomless pit, and he, myself, and another person whose name I have forgotten were the only persons ever at the bottom of Gorin's dome to my knowledge. End quote. In 1866, the first photos from within the cave were taken by Charles Waldeck, a photographer from Cincinnati, Ohio. Then, in the earliest 20th century, the Kentucky Cave Wars happened, and this was a period of bitter competition between local cave owners for tourist dollars. Broad tactics of deception were used to lure visitors away from their intended destination to other private show caves. There were misleading signs placed along the roads leading to Mammoth Cave, and one of the typical strategies during the early days of automobile travel involved representatives, known as cappers, of the other private show caves hopping aboard a tourist car running board and leading the passengers to believe that Mammoth Cave was a closed, quarantine cave or otherwise inaccessible. So, this was kind of just locals versus locals trying to get the tourists to visit their cave for the money. Another crazy fact about Mammoth Cave is that in 1906, it became accessible by steamboat with the construction of a lock and dam at Brownsville, Kentucky. That is how huge this cave is. According to the Köppen climate classification system, Mammoth Cave National Park has a humid subtropical climate. And if you've ever been in the South, you know this to be true. You don't have to Google that. As with any cave, a lot of bats live in Mammoth Cave. The following species of bats inhabit this cave: the Indiana bat, gray bat, little brown bat, big brown bat, and the tricolored bat. Other animals that live here include two genre of crickets and a cave salamander. There are two species of cave fish and a cave crawfish or crayfish and a cave shrimp. So lots of wildlife that lives in the water, which is super cool. Um, yeah, it's just very interesting when like you have no light, and there's all the air. It's a big system, so there's lots of air, but like it still blows my mind that these things can survive in like very harsh conditions like Mammoth Cave. Those historical markers I was talking to you about earlier, they are actually a tribute to veterans and lost soldiers from the World War One. And like I said, they look to be in perfect condition because they're not exposed to the weather. They look brand new. It's very eerie to see the dates on there and know that those have been standing and look pristine. Okay, now's when we start to talk spooky. One of the tours that's offered is the spooky tour called the Violet City Lantern Tour. And on the website, it says that this is a truly historic way to experience Mammoth Cave because this tour travels exclusively by lantern light. It's 3 hours long and it winds through the history and prehistory of Mammoth Cave as you wander through huge, broad tunnels. This tour climbs and descends many incredibly steep hills on historic dirt trails as you experience the cave in the light of the earliest explorers. One of the park guides stated that this is a tour that a lot of people experience apparitions or hear things, and they say this is because lantern light is a dynamic light, meaning it moves, follows you, and gives you way more shadows. This tour guide says, quote, "You really get to understand how easy it is to get carried away with just a lantern light and darkness around you," end quote. So not only is the light spooky, but there's a 3-hour tour that traverses huge rooms where the tuberculosis clinic was housed, and you even see two remaining stone huts. I would love to take this tour. Um, I would love to do this like super creepy thing, and but then I also get like kind of freaked out by that stuff. So I don't know. I love the idea of it, but I don't know if I could actually do that. In 1839, someone named John Croghan of Louisville bought Mammoth Cave estate, including Stephen Bishop and its other slaves from the previous owner, Franklin Gorin. Um, this man, John, actually he ran a tuberculosis hospital in the cave from 1842 to 1843. And the reason why he did this is because he believed the vapors would cure his patients. Now, we obviously know that's really not how things work, and a widespread epidemic of the period this just kind of made things worse. Tuberculosis actually claimed the life of this doctor in 1849. And in 1842, 16 patients with tuberculosis were invited to live in the cave, an attempt to cure them with the cave's climate. The patients lived in buildings constructed by the enslaved people, but the damp and unventilated environment made the disease worse, and 5 of the patients died. In 1935, the desiccated body of an indigenous man was found in Mammoth Cave National Park on a ledge under a rock that had fallen on him. An exception to the purposeful burial, that we talked about earlier, was when these remains were discovered. These were remains of an adult male, and it was very evident that a large boulder had crushed and killed him. The boulder had shifted and settled onto the victim, who they believed to be a pre Columbian miner who had disturbed the rubble that was supporting this large rock. The remains of the ancient victim were named Lost John and exhibited to the public into the 1970s when they were interred in a secret location in Mammoth Cave for reasons for preservation as well as emerging political sensitivities with respect to the public display of indigenous remains. So that was a lot, but like I just said, they found this human that had been crushed, who was a Native American or indigenous person. And I am like kind of disgusted and like fascinated that they kept this mummified body on display in the cave until the 1970s. These remains were on display for like 35 years, and that is nuts. But they are now buried in a secret location in the cave. So he's at his final resting place now. Now, this is one of the craziest stories about Mammoth Cave. In the early 20th century, Floyd Collins spent 10 years exploring the Flint Ridge cave system, which, as you know, we're a little bit to the north, before he died at Sand Cave, Kentucky in 1925. And this is how his death goes. While exploring Sand Cave and Mammoth Cave, he dislodged a rock onto his leg while in a tight crawlway and was unable to be rescued before dying of starvation. Now, attempts to rescue him created a mass media sensation that resulted in publicity that drew tons of people to Mammoth Cave to view his death, which is very morbid and very weird. Um, but basically, his death actually, drew these prominent Kentuckians to initiate a movement that actually resulted in the national park being established in 1941. As Floyd Collins was trapped, people began to arrive from all parts of the country, and a carnival atmosphere took hold at the mouth of Sand Cave. There were vendors, they were selling food, drinks, and souvenirs. Thousands of sightseers descended on Cave City, and the state was forced to dispatch troops to keep order. All because of this guy was trapped. And it's I imagine his situation to kind of be like that movie, that book, 127 hours. And that is very much kind of what happened, except this man died in the cave. Reporters came from all over as the news of his entrapment began a national story. The most notable of these reporters was William Burke Miller, who called himself Skeets because he was, quote, not much bigger than a mosquito, end quote. Skeets Miller made several daring trips into Sand Cave to interview Floyd, interviews which would later earn him the Pulitzer Prize. I can't imagine what Floyd was thinking because he was trapped, his leg was stuck, he could not move, and people and reporters are coming from all over the country to hear him and to interview him as he's trapped, and he probably knows he's going to die. And on the 18th day after his entrapment, rescuers finally reached him via a 50-foot vertical shaft, but it was too late. Floyd Collins was pronounced dead of exposure, and Sand Cave was sealed with Floyd's body inside. Only months later would his body be removed for a formal burial closer to his family's home near Crystal Cave. And that's really sad, but also it's it's kind of insane. It's kind of insane that people made this like vendors came and sold food and drinks and souvenirs, and apparently you could hear Floyd talking, um, but it was difficult to get to him. So when Skeets Miller was interviewing him, he wasn't like right there with Floyd. It was from kind of far away. And I just think this is probably the craziest story about Mammoth Cave. One thing I wanted to note is that 10 people have gone missing in this area in recent years with nothing being found. It's almost like they vanished into thin air. From missing persons to drownings, there are some weird things going on in Cave City, Kentucky. So, how haunted is Mammoth Cave National Park? Well, if you didn't know, Mammoth Cave National Park is known as one of the most haunted natural wonders in the world. There have been over 150 documented paranormal events. And park rangers Colleen O'Connor Olson and Charles Hanyon have recorded many of the park stories in their book, Scary Stories of Mammoth Cave. Like I mentioned previously, other cave explorers have found underground channels and mummified remains of indigenous people that dated back to 445 BC. Also, in the early 1800s, Stephen Bishop, which was that enslaved guide and explorer, he actually discovered a species of blind albino fish inside the cave. Numerous other scientists have found shark teeth fossils. So we know a lot about geology and what this area looked like pre humans, and it would have been a wild place. Throughout modern history, visitors have reported ghostly apparitions, and this is according to that book that I mentioned, Scary Stories of Mammoth Cave. Some have described the ghost of Floyd Collins, that caver who died. Some say his ghost keeps cavers from getting lost or injured in the system. His ghost has been heard calling for help, and objects have been known to be thrown from an unknown source. Other visitors have reported hearing coughing from the TB cabins or being shoved even though no one was near. One ranger wrote in the same book that several people say they have seen a ghostly figure standing on a rock in a room called Chief City, and that this man wore a distinctive hat with a drooping brim that was common among early guides and explorers. Autumn Bennett said, quote, other guides have mentioned seeing things, but it's not something we talk about because we like to stick to facts. She's been giving tours since 2003, and she says she's never experienced anything supernatural herself, but she understands how people's imaginations might get the best of them. Quote, Mammoth Cave has been described as grand, gloomy, and peculiar. It's all dark and unfamiliar, end quote. So we've got people saying they've seen apparitions of African American slaves in the caves. Some say that sensory deprivation in caves can cause anxiety and hallucinations. And actually, that tour that I told you, the Violet City Cave Tour, during a blackout, one ranger turns off his electric light while another ranger speaks to the group by the light of an oil lantern. And this is what happens. Many of the park guides report having strange experiences during a blackout. Rangers have been shoved playfully by an unseen force. They have also heard footsteps and turned to see no one there. Some people have been grabbed or touched in the darkness when there were no other people nearby, and that would freak me the fuck out, let me tell you. During one of these blackouts, guide Larry Purcell noticed a black family standing behind the rest of the group. Ranger Purcell was a bit surprised to see them since he hadn't noticed any black tourists in this group. This ranger noted that the father, who wore a white Panama hat, was watching the other ranger talk with the rapt attention. Ranger Purcell turned the electric lights back. He looked for the black family, but he couldn't find a single African American on the tour. So he obviously thinks that these were slaves that were early explorers. And the room where the ranger saw this mysterious black family is called the Methodist Church because miners once held religious services there. And during those days, if a black guide and his family attended those services, it was customary for them to stand back a distance from the whites in the group. Very, very interesting that a ranger claims to have seen these things. And I think that when people of science and authority claim that they have seen or experienced paranormal events, I think there's just more credibility. And I'm not saying I wouldn't believe someone that's not a ranger or not a science person, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Rangers wouldn't feed into that. And why would they? They have nothing to gain. But this ranger definitely documented this strange and eerie interaction almost. Mammoth Cave has been surrounded by war, death, diseases, and it's got a very, very dark history. And I found it fascinating to research. And if you ever get the chance, I think you should go. It's not a national park like out west, like Zion or whatever, but it's unique in its own ways. And how beautiful and unique it would be to explore Mammoth Cave just by lantern light. It's a super interesting national park to visit, and I suggest going. It's very commercialized. There's a lot of people on these tours, but I think if you have the chance, definitely go do it and report back if you experience anything supernatural. As always, recreate responsibly and remember, sometimes the great outdoors aren't always great. Thanks for listening to Morbid Outdoors. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. It's free, easy, and it helps us out immensely. When you subscribe, you get updates on our latest episodes, and it also boosts our visibility, making it easier for other curious souls to find us. Another great way to support Morbid Outdoors is by leaving us a review. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, a quick review helps us know what you love about the show. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Morbid Outdoors Podcast. You can email us case suggestions and your campfire stories at morbidoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for the support, and I'll see you next time.